Sanbonani. That means greetings in isiZulu. isiZulu is one of South Africa's native official languages. As indicated in our first episodes, we will be using different languages to convey our greetings, simply because we embrace diversity and also because maritime industry is transnational in nature. Today is our second recording of the Maritime Law Podcast, and we are excited about the feedback we've received regarding the first recording. Now, if you haven't listened to it, please visit our YouTube channel or follow us on Instagram and Facebook under the handle Maritime Law Podcast. Kindly follow the link provided on those social platforms to listen to our first episode. If you listened to our first episode, you would have noticed that it was merely an introduction of this initiative, whereby Prof. Portia and I discussed in detail what the objective of these podcasts were. Now, without any waste of time, let's get into the maritime term of the day. The term of the day is TCE, which stands for Time Charter Equivalent. It is a method used for determining the net profit or loss of operating a vessel per day by subtracting voyages expenses such as port and fuel fees, as well as operating costs from voyages revenue, and then dividing the total by the number of days it took the vessel to make a round trip. Well, we all know I'm joined by the professor, who vehemently insists that I call her by her first name. Portia, how are you?
Hello, Sharon. It is good to be back with you with our first actual recording. It's exciting. Thank you.
It is. I'm good myself, thank you. Portia, a lot has happened in the maritime industry since our last podcast. From the devastating explosion at the port of Beirut to the Japanese-owned bulk carrier that ran aground off Mauritius, which, by the way, resulted in over 1,000 tons of oil spill. Is there anything you want to say regarding these tragic events before we get into today's topic?
Yes, just one thing, Sharon. I hope that we can get to understand the sheer scale of damage that can be caused by accidents in the shipping industry. And
sure.
So because you're dealing with large scale, if large scale grain falls into the ocean, that's one thing, because that's easily absorbed into the ocean, might not be that damaging. But when it's oil and when it's a potential explosion, it's really going to be tough. And I'm sure that accident investigators and associations like MIBE in the UK who investigate these incidents, they are being kept busy. So our hearts are with those who are suffering losses, both from the commercial perspective and of course more deeply and more importantly from the human loss perspective.
Absolutely. Now, I read on Sea Trade Maritime News that the captain who was navigating the vessel that ran aground is actually facing 6 years in prison for, and I quote, charges of unlawful interference with the operation of a property of a ship that resulted in unsafe navigation. But of course, this is an ongoing matter, and we'll obviously keep a close lookout and see how it pans out.
Exactly. That's, as lawyers, we know to kind of give the courts their time while the matter is being adjudicated. And we're thinking of them. Very serious consequences.
Absolutely. We hope for the best. And that for me is for justice to be appropriately administered for purposes of advancing safety in the maritime industry, as well as to provide adequate protection of its workforce.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, without any waste of time, Portia, let's just get right into it. Today, we're going to talk about COVID-19, a pandemic so unforeseeable and its impact incomprehensible. Today, we are talking about it from the perspective of marine insurance, and we will specifically discuss two scenarios. One, whether marine insurance companies will cover any losses sustained by their customers as a result of COVID-19. And 2, whether marine insurance companies themselves can put up clauses in the insurance policy limiting their obligation to pay out in an event of a loss resulting from COVID-19. Now, Prof, with regards to the above scenarios, is it legal? Can these instances occur in law?
Well, Sharon, fantastic question. Well, it depends on whether we are going to call COVID-19 an unforeseeable, irresistible event, which basically releases the parties from the contract. In other words, is this a force majeure or force vis major or force majeure, as many people say it in different contexts?
Yes.
Basically, we need to work out whether COVID-19 is going to be interpreted as a force majeure, which also means a fortuitous or casus fortuitous event.
Yeah.
Now, fortuitous events and especially a force majeure is a standard clause in most contracts, especially in the insurance world, particularly marine insurance world, because no insurance company or no syndicate actually wants to expose themselves to an indeterminable amount of losses. So for the most part, sometimes when these force majeures are involved, then parties are actually considered released from obligations as performance of that contract has either become too difficult, impossible, or outright illegal. So in that case, it means that that's the end of the obligation. Now, the second part is that, as I always tell my students, read your contracts and make sure that you know which clauses give, which clauses give it, and which clauses take it away. So you will find that for the most part, the exclusion clauses in marine insurance contracts, they will typically kind of put you in a good light as to whether you are covered or not. You cannot just assume that just because you've got an accidental loss that you are automatically covered. Your contract could actually be so divergent from another contract that you may have a similar incident with someone else who in their contract got covered, but you are not. So there's always that uncertainty or division or differing opinions and interpretations of contracts. Yes.
Yeah. You know, Prof, I have a pressing question, if I may put it like that, with regards to these clauses. Say, for an instance, I'm a carrier and I'm in a business of carrying goods across the country or across the globe, that is. And I have contracted with a consignee in China, and I am in South Africa, transporting goods from South Africa to China. And we enter into a contract whereby we include in our contract that in an event where it is impossible for me to fulfill the obligations of the contract, I will not be held liable for any damages that occur in that regards. Let's say, for an instance, it's because of COVID-19. Now, let's say I'm a carrier and I am insured. Can I claim from my insurers to say, listen, what happened is there is a loss that was sustained. People have lost revenue, or people have lost due to the fact that I was not able to transport goods. Can I then claim from the insurer to say, hey, there's a loss that resulted because of COVID-19, therefore I would like for you to pay out?
Okay, that's a great question. That brings us to the second leg or branch of insurance coverages, and that is the branch of marine insurance known as protection and indemnity insurance, where clubs basically group together on a non-profit and mutual basis to actually insure one another, because shipping companies and ship owners know that just by operating your ship, there are liabilities that will come from operating your ship that may not necessarily fall into your hull coverage, cargo coverage, or other traditional coverages. And also, you may be covered depending on whether you were able to foresee a loss like this and actually put it in a contract ahead of time. Maybe out there was a designer contract, marine insurance contract, that actually would cover you for pandemics because people don't expect them. But on the other hand, on the protection and indemnity side, you actually have to check your group club rules to see how much they can cover you for the losses. But even the liabilities that arise from protection and indemnity insurance, it's more concerned about your sailors being repatriated and things like that. It does not cover the main contract. So you have to be very careful about reading also the club rules. So if you are covered for COVID-19 as what is known as an infectious, under the infectious disease clause, there will be limits as to what you covered for, and it will only cover really just what will happen to your sailors and your employees and other foreseeable liabilities under the club rules that will cover you for what happens. So the short answer is the only guarantee is what you have put in your contract. And if you were not able to foresee that there could be a pandemic like this, and there's no way to interpret the contract to cover COVID-19, then you may be in danger of actually having no coverage. So you have to be very careful. I have spoken to some ship owners who are very, very intelligent about situations like this, and they have actually been okay because their insurance companies did pay. But there are also those who are realizing how catastrophic these losses are. And they are quickly drafting contracts that exclude COVID-19 and similar situations. For example, the Lloyd's of London have actually come up with COVID-19 clauses that actually exclude these type of losses. So they, and being a contract, parties have a right to actually adopt clauses from these associations. And I'm pretty sure that the American Institute of Marine Underwriters, as well as the English Institute, they are also, which also has Lloyd's as an interest in it. They have come up with clauses to say what they will and will not cover. And so parties to the contract, underwriters themselves, they can decide whether they can take on such a risk. But what we do know is that for the most part, insurance companies cannot also just keep on paying money endlessly for indeterminable amounts. They also need to know what their limits of coverage will be. And if they've done that, then you look into your contract and hopefully you are covered.
Absolutely. Just to follow up with on that with regards to the limits of what the insurance company will be liable for. I know that there is what we call limitation of liability, and normally that happens that covers ship owners. Is there something similar to that when it comes to insurance companies? Can they say we are limited? And I'm not talking from a contract point of view that they have included in a contract, but is there a law, a regulation, a convention that specifically provides for insurers having that right in law to be able to limit their liability, or is it just a contractual right?
That's a great question, and for the most part, it is a contractual right. But if there are huge injustices that happen, then it is very possible for the United Nations Development on Trade Commissions to actually step in and say, these clauses that you're coming up with as the industry, they are so unfair. So maybe you should do something about them. So someone can oversee the process of making sure that the contracts that are taken are fair. But for the most part, it's a contractual issue. Yes. And I
Okay.
just wanted to point out that with regards to club coverage for losses for COVID, you are likely to get liability covered for persons other than the seamen. So passengers can be covered under COVID. Illness and death of seamen can be covered. Repatriation and substitution expenses. In other words, if you have to change your captain because someone's gotten sick, you could be covered by your club coverage. Loss or damage of sea or to the effects of seamen and other persons aboard, diversion expenses, quarantine expenses, fines, and cargo-related claims. You could be covered under the club cover. But at the same time, as I said, you look at your club rules, and most people are actually most people are actually just putting the COVID-19 exclusion clause in order to protect themselves from too much damage. And actually I was reading a commentary by an attorney who practices in New York. I don't have his name in front of me right now, but what he was saying is that we are probably going to see new types of contracts going forward after this pandemic. He is saying that people were caught unawares and they are looking at this catastrophe and they are thinking, oh boy, we need to go back. So he's saying in the shipping industry, we are very traditional about the contracts that we normally have. We can almost guess what will happen because of the strong tradition of what is covered and what isn't. But with COVID-19, it's going to change the game a little bit. It's going to change the rules. So that's going to be interesting to see going forward.
Should be interesting. I'm not sure how in depth you've gone with the article that you just mentioned now, but does the author perhaps go into detail with regards to what would be the attitude of the maritime industry to such clauses? What will they likely lean towards?
He has pointed us to the fact that it is making the industry adapt quickly and protect itself. So it's focused on survival. Once I have the link to that article, I will send it so that people can get it on our social media. But yeah, he does say that it's about adapting now and making sure that people have enough money to cover the risks. And you know, this is so important. Actually, I was looking at a paper on the relevance of mathematics in the insurance industry, which was written in 2015 by a gentleman called Olufemi Ayankoya, and he is part of the Department of Mathematics in Covenant University in Nigeria. And he's basically an insurance person, and he was looking at different equations for calculating the losses that are used by the industry. And he actually did mention what would happen in a pandemic. And he got to the point where he was like, the equations and the mathematics to work that out would be so catastrophic that no insurance company will actually willingly expose themselves to that, and for good reason. You know, so that paper is freely available on the internet. It's called The Relevance of Mathematics in the Insurance Industry by Olufemi Ayankoya. I would like to recommend that so that those who are in risks assessment and analysis can actually, and students as well, can actually look at how the insurance industry works out, how much liability they'll take on, and what they are willing to pay for should all those catastrophes happen, and where the reinsurance part comes in. Yeah, because to pay, you have to have money, you have to have something to pay with. Yeah.
No, that's true. That's absolutely true. I will give it a read. I will visit and read it. But you touched on something that I wanted to ask you.
Mm-hmm.
Marine insurance companies, they can actually limit their liability in an instance of a pandemic. They can just say, we will not be able to pay out if such a pandemic occurs.
Yes, either by saying that it releases them from liability based on the fact that it is a force majeure or force majeure, or they could say they limit their liability based on the fact that these are the maximum amounts they're willing to pay out, or they could limit their liability by totally excluding that particular liability, either by borrowing exclusions clauses from different insurance associations, or simply just basically making sure that people get a unique coverage for such instances. So they'll say, go to another underwriter that's willing to take on that risk. We are not. So these are some of the methods that are common in the industry.
And that makes sense. That absolutely makes sense, because at the end of the day, it is a business. You know, everybody's trying by all means to cut the losses as much as they can and avoid risks.
Yes,
you know,
absolutely.
So it makes absolute sense. You know, I read up on the internet, and a lot of people have just been asking, is COVID-19 a force majeure or a breach of contract? And I think, based on what you said, it is safe to say that it can become a force majeure. We can put it in a contract as that.
Yes, some contracts have interpreted it that way. And if you look at the catastrophe, it has worked out in that way. But some contracts have said, no, we do cover infectious diseases, and we don't know the circumstances from which they may come. So they have sort of coverage for it. But because it's becoming, one loss after the other, it's becoming something that the industry needs to deal with. And I'd like to point out to our listeners that Sharon and I worked really hard this last month to try and locate anywhere where a court has actually tried to sit and test these interpretations of contracts. And so far we came up a little bit dry, but maybe we will see these clauses being tested in a court of law, and that will be a very interesting case study for us to follow up on, and to see what different nations or other jurisdictions, or even the national jurisdictions of where we are located, Sharon and I, how they interpret what the insurance will be going forward.
Absolutely. We'll definitely keep a lookout for that. I anticipate that something must come up in the near future. We are still within a pandemic, so it makes sense why we still haven't been able to locate a case that deals with this particular subject we're talking about today.
Correct.
But thank you so much, Professor. I personally have learned a lot. I've done marine insurance in university when I was doing my master's, but obviously we didn't have this pandemic, and I cannot even recall right now that we've dealt with something of this magnitude. But I've learned quite a lot from this engagement, and I believe that our listeners as well have learned quite a lot. And thank you so much for sharing your pearls of wisdom with us today. Just in closing, is there anything that you want to say to our listeners?
Well, I'm so privileged to have spoken to everyone, and I hope someone can really benefit out of this. And again, I want to emphasize, read your contracts, be sure of what the clauses are, because even the courts will look at your contracts before they make a decision if in a case of a dispute. So contracts and clauses, very, very important. That's all I wanted to say.
Even the fine print, that is absolutely important.
Couldn't agree more.
That's absolutely important. For an example, I might be deviating a bit, but what happened was I was looking for a new insurance for my car, right? And I just started calling insurance companies, and this particular insurance company gave such a very enticing offer. And when I read through the finest prints, I realized that the reason why the premium was low is because they only cover you if you get into an accident and you bump into another car. So if you bump into an object, they don't cover for
Oh
you.
my.
And I was like, how many of, and mind you, I was talking to a consultant. The consultant never made mention of that. And when I received my insurance policy, I read through that and I was like, absolutely not. Cancel. I am not taking this. Imagine if I had not gone through it. And that's the benefit of having law background. So I can imagine the people who are in business, ship owners who are just focused on generating income and making sure that the business is a success, that they may overlook such fine prints in contracts. And it's very important to read each and every clause, no matter how small it is very critical.
Absolutely. And this is why some offices have someone known as a risk manager, so that it's their job to make sure that, you know, when they talk about accidents, they mean also bumping into objects, not just other cars. And hopefully, I mean, you are not going to be driving into objects. We know that. But still, you know, you want to make sure, because, you know, we are human beings. We don't know what could happen. We make mistakes. So we want to be fully covered for the negligence that may or may not happen. Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. And that's the nature of insurance,
Correct.
right? To cover what you cannot possibly foresee to happen to you. And accidents happen. And unfortunately, sometimes they don't involve another car.
Yes, that's absolutely right, Sharon. Absolutely right.
This was such an amazing episode. What a great progression from our first episode. I'm grateful that we've had this time to discuss and go into depth with the law and the COVID-19. Thank you so much, Professor. I just want to close off by just saying thank you to our listeners. We've received such positive feedback. People are asking, when is the next episode coming out? And it's just so exciting to just receive such a positive feedback. So guys, please don't forget to just inbox us if you have any further questions following up from the podcast. If maybe you want clarity on something, myself and Professor are available to answer any questions. Go on YouTube. We'll be uploading this episode on YouTube as well. So just keep a lookout on all our social platforms, and that's where we will keep you updated. So without any waste of time, I think myself and Professor, we're just going to say the famous line. And we're going to say, get on board.
Tune in.
And tune in. Thank you guys for listening. Bye.